Prejudiced cop sentenced to maximum sentence for shooting federal prosecutor, Part 1. The rain fell hard on the streets of Riverside that Friday evening. Officer James Mercer sat in his police car, watching droplets race down his windshield. His radio crackled with routine calls, but the night had been quiet so far. Mercer had been a cop for 23 years in this changing neighborhood. He didn't like the changes. New people were moving in. People who didn't look like him, talk like him, or respect the law like he thought they should. Mercer's fellow officers knew about his tough approach. They had seen how he treated people with darker skin during traffic stops. They had heard his comments back at the station. Some of the younger officers felt uncomfortable, but the older ones just shrugged. "That's just Mercer," they would say. Nobody ever reported him. Nobody wanted to be the one to break the unwritten rule. Cops don't turn on other cops. The dashboard clock showed 9:42 p.m. when Mercer spotted the black BMW with tinted windows. The car rolled through a stop sign at the corner of Maple and 5th Street. Mercer straightened in his seat, his mood instantly changing. He didn't like expensive cars in this neighborhood. In his mind, they usually meant drug dealers or other criminals. He flipped on his lights and followed the BMW. Inside the BMW, Marcus Wilson rubbed his tired eyes. The 38-year-old federal prosecutor had stayed late at the office again, working on a case that kept him up at night. It was a police corruption case involving officers from the Riverside precinct, Mercer's precinct. Wilson had found evidence of officers taking bribes, planting evidence, and harassing innocent people. The case was almost ready to go to court. Wilson didn't notice he had rolled through the stop sign. His mind was still at the office, thinking about the evidence he had organized that day. The flash of police lights in his mirror snapped him back to reality. He sighed and pulled over, reaching for his wallet in his back pocket. Mercer parked behind the BMW and called in the license plate. "Dispatch, I've got a black BMW, license plate ARX 547, at Maple and 5th. "Copy that, Officer Mercer," the dispatcher responded. "Running the plate now." While waiting for the information, Mercer got out of his car. His right hand rested on his gun holster, something he did automatically when approaching vehicles in this neighborhood. He walked slowly toward the BMW, his flashlight beam bouncing off the wet pavement. Wilson watched the officer approach in his side mirror. He had been pulled over before and knew the routine. As a black man driving an expensive car, it happened more often than it should. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, visible. His federal prosecutor badge was in his glove compartment, along with his car registration. He would explain who he was once the officer reached his window. The dispatcher's voice came through Mercer's radio. "Vehicle registered to Marcus Wilson. No outstanding warrants or violations." Mercer tapped on the driver's window with his flashlight. Wilson pressed the button to roll down his window. Cold rain blew in, making him shiver. "License and registration," Mercer said flatly, not bothering with a greeting. His flashlight beam shined directly into Wilson's eyes, making it hard for Wilson to see the officer's face. "Good evening, officer," Wilson said politely. "My registration is in the glove compartment, and I have my ID right here." He pointed toward the glove compartment. "I'm going to reach for it now, okay?" Mercer nodded, but his body tensed. In his 23 years on the force, he had developed deep biases. When he saw a black man in an expensive car in this neighborhood, he automatically assumed the worst. Every movement looked suspicious to him. Wilson slowly moved his right hand from the steering wheel and reached toward the glove compartment. "I also have my federal prosecutor badge in there," he explained. "I work at the U.S. Attorney's office downtown." But Mercer wasn't really listening. When Wilson's hand moved toward the glove compartment, Mercer saw only a threat. In his mind, the glove compartment meant a gun. He didn't register Wilson's words about being a federal prosecutor. All he saw was a man reaching for something hidden. 3 shots rang out in the quiet night. The first bullet shattered the car window. The second hit Wilson in the shoulder, spinning him in his seat. The third struck his chest. Wilson slumped forward, his head hitting the steering wheel. The car horn blared into the rainy night. Mercer jumped back, his gun still pointed at the car. Shots fired! Shots fired! He yelled into his radio. Suspect made a threatening move. Officer needs backup at Maple and 5th. Blood spread across Wilson's white shirt. The pain was overwhelming, but somehow he remained conscious. He tried to speak, to explain that he was reaching for his ID, not a weapon. No words came out. The car horn continued to blare as his body pressed against the steering wheel. Within minutes, the quiet street was filled with flashing lights and sirens. 4 police cars surrounded the BMW. Officers approached with guns drawn, shouting commands at the unresponsive driver. He went for something in the glove compartment, Mercer told the first officer who reached him. I had to react. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. Deep down, something felt wrong, but he pushed the feeling away. Paramedics arrived quickly. They carefully pulled Wilson from the car and laid him on the wet pavement. They worked frantically to stop the bleeding. One paramedic opened the glove compartment to look for ID and found Wilson's federal prosecutor badge, along with his car registration. There was no weapon. This guy's a federal prosecutor, the paramedic said, holding up the badge. The officers looked at each other in shock. Mercer's face went pale. Officer Sarah Chen, one of the first to arrive at the scene, noticed something the others had missed. The BMW's dashboard camera was still recording. The small red light blinked steadily in the corner of the windshield. Everything that had happened, the traffic stop, Wilson's words, the shooting, all of it had been captured on video. While the paramedics rushed Wilson to the hospital, fighting to keep him alive, Chen quietly approached the car. She knew department protocol required securing all evidence. The dashboard camera was key evidence. She carefully removed the memory card and placed it in an evidence bag. We need to get this to the station right away, she told her partner. She didn't trust Mercer, never had. She had heard his comments about people of color, had seen his aggressive approach on traffic stops. Now a man was fighting for his life because of it. News of the shooting spread quickly through the police department and the prosecutor's office. By midnight, the police chief was holding an emergency meeting with his top commanders. The fact that an officer had shot a federal prosecutor during a routine traffic stop was already a major story. When they reviewed the dashboard camera footage, the situation became even worse. The video clearly showed Wilson explaining he was a federal prosecutor. It showed him pointing to the glove compartment and saying he was going to reach for his. There was no threatening move, no justification for the shots Mercer fired. This is bad, the police chief said, rubbing his forehead. Really bad. Across town at Riverside Hospital, doctors worked desperately to save Wilson's life. The bullet in his chest had missed his heart by less than an inch. He had lost a dangerous amount of blood. His sister Sarah, a community organizer, rushed to the hospital when she got the call. She sat in the waiting room, tears streaming down her face, praying for her brother to survive. By morning, the story was headline news. Federal prosecutor shot during routine traffic stop. Reporters gathered outside the hospital and the police department. Social media exploded with the story, especially when people learned the victim was working on a police corruption case involving officers from the same precinct as the officer who shot him. Mercer sat alone in an interview room at the police station. His gun and badge had been taken, standard procedure after an officer-involved shooting. But the way his fellow officers looked at him told him this was different. This wasn't going to be the usual process where officers stuck together. The man he shot wasn't just any civilian. He was a federal prosecutor with a dashboard camera that had recorded everything. For the first time in his 23 years on the force, Officer James Mercer felt afraid, not of physical danger, but of what was coming next. As dawn broke over, Riverside bringing light to the rain-soaked streets, Mercer began to realize that his life would never be the same again. Prejudiced cop, sentenced to maximum sentence for shooting federal prosecutor. Part 2. The morning after the shooting, Riverside woke up to the shocking news. Local TV stations showed the same image over and over, the black BMW with shattered windows, and Marcus Wilson's blood on the driver's seat. By noon, crowds had gathered outside the police station. People held signs that read, "Justice for Marcus" and "No more police violence." The police chief called in extra officers to manage the growing crowd. Inside the hospital, doctors told Sarah Wilson that her brother had survived the night, but he was still in critical condition. The bullets had done serious damage. Marcus was in a coma, machines helping him breathe. Sarah sat by his bed holding his hand and talking to him, hoping he could hear her. "You have to fight, Marcus," she whispered. "We need you. The community needs you." Maria Gonzalez, Marcus's partner at the federal prosecutor's office, arrived at the hospital with flowers. Her eyes were red from crying. She and Marcus had been working together for 3 years on tough cases. The police corruption case was their biggest one yet. "How is he?" Maria asked, setting the flowers on the small table by the bed. "Still the same," Sarah replied. "The doctors say we just have to wait." Maria looked at Marcus's pale face and the tubes connected to his body. She felt angry and scared. "This wasn't an accident, Sarah. Marcus was investigating officers from that same police station." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know. He told me he was getting close to making arrests. He said he had found evidence against several officers. We need to make sure that evidence is safe," Maria said. "And we need to talk to the FBI. This case needs to be taken away from the local police. They can't investigate themselves." Meanwhile, at the police station, Officer James Mercer sat in a small room with his union representative, Tom Jenkins. Mercer had not slept all night. His hands shook as he drank his third cup of coffee. "They're going to see the dashboard video," Mercer said. "It doesn't look good for me." Jenkins sighed. "I've been a police union rep for 15 years, James. I've helped officers through all kinds of situations, but this..." He shook his head. "The man you shot is a federal prosecutor working on a case against officers in this very station. And there's video evidence. This is as bad as it gets." "I thought he was reaching for a gun," Mercer insisted. "Anyone would have done the same thing." Jenkins looked at him with doubt in his eyes. "The video shows him telling you he was reaching for his ID. He told you he was a federal prosecutor." "I didn't hear that part," Mercer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It all happened so fast." The door opened and Police Chief Robert Johnson walked in. His face was serious. Behind him were 2 men in suits. "Officer Mercer," Chief Johnson said, "these men are Special Agents Miller and Taylor from the FBI. They're taking over the investigation of last night's shooting." Mercer's stomach dropped. The FBI's involvement meant this was being treated as a federal case, not a local police matter. The usual protections he might have expected were gone. "We'll need you to come with us, Officer Mercer," Agent Miller said. "We have some questions about the incident." "Am I under arrest?" Mercer asked. "Not at this time," Agent Taylor replied. "But this is a federal investigation now. The man you shot is a federal prosecutor working on a sensitive case." Mercer looked at Jenkins, who nodded slightly. "Go with them. Answer their questions truthfully. I'll work on getting you a lawyer." As Mercer was let out, officers he had worked with for years watched in silence. No one spoke to him or offered support. The wall of blue that usually protected officers in trouble seemed to have disappeared. Later that afternoon, the FBI agents visited Marcus Wilson's office. They sealed it and began collecting files related to the police corruption case. Maria Gonzalez helped them understand what Marcus had been working on. "Marcus told me he had evidence against at least 5 officers," she explained, "including proof they were taking bribes from drug dealers to look the other way." Agent Miller nodded as he carefully packed files into evidence boxes. "Did he ever mention Officer James Mercer, specifically?" Maria thought for a moment. "Not by name. But he said one of the officers had been on the force for over 20 years and had a history of excessive force complaints, especially against minorities." "That sounds like Mercer," Agent Taylor said. "We've been reviewing his personnel file. There are at least 12 complaints against him in the last 10 years, all filed by Black or Hispanic citizens, all mysteriously dropped or ruled unfounded. At the FBI office, Mercer sat in an interview room. His lawyer, a man named Richard Davis, who specialized in defending police officers, sat beside him. Across the table, Agents Miller and Taylor set up a laptop. "Before we begin questioning," Agent Miller said, "We want to show you something, Officer Mercer." He turned the laptop toward Mercer and pressed play. The screen showed Marcus Wilson's dashboard camera video. The quality was excellent, the sound clear. Mercer watched himself approach the car. He heard Wilson's polite greeting. He heard Wilson clearly state he was a federal prosecutor and that his ID was in the glove compartment. He saw Wilson's slow, careful movement toward the glove compartment. Then he saw himself fire 3 shots without warning, without justification. Mercer's face went pale. The video was worse than he had imagined. There was no way to claim he felt threatened, no way to justify what he had done. "Turn it off," Mercer's lawyer said. "My client has nothing to say at this time." Agent Taylor closed the laptop. "That's fine. But you should know we're also reviewing Officer Mercer's text messages, social media, and emails. We have a warrant for all his communications for the past 5 years." "On what grounds?" Davis demanded. "We're investigating this as a possible hate crime and civil rights violation," Agent Miller explained. "The evidence suggests Officer Mercer may have acted out of racial prejudice." As Mercer and his lawyer left the FBI office, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. Camera flashes lit up the evening sky. Mercer kept his head down, trying to hide his face. When he finally got home, his wife Lisa was packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm taking the kids to my mother's," she said, not looking at him. "The news vans are parked outside. People are calling. Someone threw a rock through the kitchen window." Her voice cracked. "The neighbors won't even talk to me. Our children can't go outside." "Lisa, please," Mercer said, reaching for her. "I need you now more than ever." She stepped away from his touch. "Did you do it, James? Did you shoot that man for no reason?" Mercer couldn't answer. The dashboard video had shown him the truth he had been trying to deny. There had been no threat, just his own prejudice built up over years of unchecked bias. Lisa zipped up the suitcase. "I saw the news. They showed a picture of the man you shot, Marcus Wilson. He's put away drug dealers, corrupt politicians. He's helped people." She finally looked at Mercer, tears in her eyes. "What have you done except make things worse?" She took the suitcase and walked past him. The children were waiting in the car, their faces pressed against the windows, confused and scared. As his family drove away, Mercer stood alone in his empty house. The television was still on, showing protesters marching through downtown Riverside. The crowd had grown larger. They carried signs with Marcus Wilson's face and chanted for justice. Mercer's phone rang. It was Jenkins, his union representative. "James, I need to tell you something," Jenkins said, his voice grim. "The FBI just found something on your phone. Text messages you sent to other officers. Messages about..." He paused. "Messages about keeping people in their place, and some racist comments about the changing neighborhood." Mercer sat down heavily on the couch. He remembered those messages, jokes and comments he had shared with a few like-minded officers, things he would never say in public. "What does this mean?" Mercer asked, though he already knew the answer. "It means you need to prepare yourself," Jenkins replied. "The FBI is coming to arrest you tomorrow morning. The charges will include attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and civil rights violations." After Jenkins hung up, Mercer sat in the dark, the glow of the TV washing over his face. On the screen, a doctor was giving an update on Marcus Wilson's condition. "Mr. Wilson remains in critical condition, but he is showing signs of improvement. His family asks for continued prayers." For the first time since the shooting, Mercer felt something beyond fear for himself. He felt shame, not just for what he had done to Marcus Wilson, but for what he had become over his years as a police officer. The prejudice that had led him to pull that trigger hadn't appeared overnight. It had grown slowly, year by year, unchallenged by those around him, until it had destroyed everything, Marcus Wilson's life and now his own. Prejudiced Cop Sentenced to Maximum Sentence for Shooting Federal Prosecutor, Part 3. The morning sun had just risen when FBI agents knocked on James Mercer's door. He was already awake, sitting at his kitchen table in the same clothes he had worn yesterday. Empty coffee cups surrounded him. The house was quiet and empty without his family. "James Mercer, we have a warrant for your arrest," Agent Miller said, holding up a document. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Mercer didn't resist. He stood up slowly and did as he was told. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Agent Miller read him his rights while Agent Taylor watched carefully. "We're taking you to the federal courthouse, Agent," Miller explained. "You'll appear before a judge this afternoon." Neighbors peeked through their windows as the agents led Mercer to a black SUV. Some took pictures with their phones. A news van had already arrived, and a reporter tried to ask Mercer questions as he was placed in the vehicle. He kept his head down, avoiding the cameras. At Riverside Hospital, something important was happening. Marcus Wilson opened his eyes, for the first time since the shooting. His sister Sarah had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed. She woke up when she heard him trying to speak. "Marcus? Oh my God, Marcus." She jumped up and pressed the call button for the nurse. "He's awake! My brother is awake!" Doctors rushed in to check Marcus. He was weak and confused, but he was conscious. The doctor shined a light in his eyes and asked him simple questions. "Do you know your name?" the doctor asked. "Marcus Wilson," he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed yesterday. "Do you know where you are?" "Hospital. Do you remember what happened to you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Traffic stop, police officer. He shot me when I reached for my ID." The doctor nodded. "That's right. You've been in a coma for 5 days, Mr. Wilson. You're doing much better now, but you have a long recovery ahead of you." Sarah held her brother's hand tightly. "The officer who shot you has been arrested. The FBI is handling the case." Marcus closed his eyes, tired from just these few minutes of talking. "My case, the police corruption case. Need to tell Maria." "Don't worry about that now," Sarah said. "Maria is taking care of everything. You just focus on getting better." Across town at the federal courthouse, Mercer sat beside his lawyer in a crowded courtroom. The room was filled with reporters, community members, and police officers. Some officers came to support Mercer, but many came because they were shocked by what he had done. The judge, an older woman named Judge Patricia Harmon, entered the courtroom. Everyone stood as she took her seat at the bench. "Case number 45792, United States versus James Mercer," the court clerk announced. The federal prosecutor, a tall man named Robert Chen, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant is charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and civil rights violations in the shooting of federal prosecutor Marcus Wilson." Judge Harmon looked at Mercer over her glasses. "How does the defendant plead?" Mercer's lawyer, Richard Davis, stood up. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Chen spoke again. "Your Honor, the government requests that bail be denied. The defendant poses a flight risk and a danger to the community. We have clear video evidence of the crime, plus evidence of a pattern of prejudiced behavior." Davis argued against this. "Your Honor, my client has strong ties to the community. He has been a police officer for 23 years. He has a family. He's not going anywhere." Judge Harmon listened to both sides, then she made her decision. "Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial." The judge's words hit Mercer hard. He had expected to go home after the hearing. Now he would be sent to jail to wait for his trial. He turned to look at the courtroom and saw that none of his fellow officers would meet his eyes. They stared, at the floor or at their phones. Even those who had come to support him seemed uncomfortable now. As Mercer was led away in handcuffs, he noticed a group of people wearing shirts with Marcus Wilson's face printed on them. They watched him with angry eyes. Among them was a young officer named David Rodriguez. Mercer recognized him as a rookie he had trained last year. Rodriguez looked directly at Mercer, his expression not angry, but disappointed and sad. Later that day, Maria Gonzalez visited Marcus at the hospital. She was happy to see him awake, though he could only stay conscious for short periods. "We need to talk about your case," Maria said, sitting close to his bed. "The FBI has all your files. They're continuing the investigation into the police corruption." Marcus nodded weakly. Did they find my special files? The ones in the hidden folder on my computer? Maria smiled. Yes, they found everything. And Marcus, it's even bigger than we thought. The evidence you collected doesn't just show 5 corrupt officers, it shows a whole network, and guess who's at the center of it all? Who? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Officer James Mercer, the same man who shot you. Maria took out her tablet and showed Marcus a diagram the FBI had created. Mercer wasn't just making racist comments and using excessive force. He was working with drug dealers, taking money to protect them. He was the ringleader. Marcus closed his eyes, processing this information. So it wasn't just random prejudice that made him shoot me. He recognized me. He knew who I was. That's what the FBI thinks, Maria confirmed. They found text messages on his phone. 3 days before he shot you, he texted another officer saying he was worried about the federal investigation. He mentioned you by name, Marcus. This news changed everything. What had seemed like a terrible act of prejudice was now looking more like an attempted murder to stop a federal investigation. At the county jail, Mercer was placed in a special unit away from other prisoners. As a former police officer, he would be a target in the general population. His cell was small and bare with just a bed, toilet, and sink. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. A guard brought him dinner on a plastic tray. You have a visitor, Mercer, the guard said. Your lawyer. Richard Davis sat across from Mercer in the visitation room. His face was grim. It's bad, James, really bad, Davis said. The FBI found more evidence, text messages where you specifically mentioned Marcus Wilson and the federal investigation. I was just worried about the investigation, Mercer protested. I didn't plan to shoot him. Davis shook his head. It doesn't matter what you say now. Those messages make it look like you recognized Wilson and shot him to stop the investigation. That's not true, Mercer insisted. I didn't know it was him when I pulled him over. The prosecution doesn't need to prove you knew it was him when you pulled him over, Davis explained. They just need to show you recognized him before you shot him. The dashboard video shows him telling you he was a federal prosecutor. Your text messages show you knew who he was and what he was investigating. Mercer put his head in his hands. What about the union? Are they going to help with my defense? Davis looked uncomfortable. The police union has decided to limit their support. The evidence against you is too strong and the case is too high profile. They don't want to be seen as defending what you did. So they're abandoning me? Mercer asked, his voice rising. After 23 years? It's not just that, Davis said quietly. The FBI investigation into police corruption is expanding. Some of the officers you worked with are now under investigation themselves. They're distancing themselves from you to save their own careers. As Davis left, Mercer felt completely alone. The walls of his world were crumbling around him. His family was gone. His fellow officers had turned their backs on him. His freedom was taken away, and now he faced the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. Back at the hospital, Marcus was getting stronger each day. The doctors were amazed by his progress. His determination to recover was powerful. When the physical therapist came to help him try to stand for the first time since the shooting, Marcus pushed himself hard. I need to get back to work, he told the therapist as he gripped the walking rails. I need to finish what I started. Sarah watched her brother with pride and worry. Don't push yourself too hard, Marcus. The FBI is handling the case now. Marcus took a shaky step forward, wincing in pain. This is about more than just the case now. This is about justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been harmed by officers like Mercer. As the sun set over Riverside that evening, 2 men in very different circumstances thought about justice. Marcus Wilson gaining strength in his hospital room, determined to recover and continue his fight against corruption. And James Mercer, alone in his jail cell, finally facing the consequences of years of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. Prejudiced cop, sentenced to maximum sentence for shooting federal prosecutor. Part 4. 3 months passed. The leaves changed color and fell from the trees. The city of Riverside tried to return to normal, But the shooting of federal prosecutor Marcus Wilson remained in everyone's minds. The trial of Officer James Mercer was scheduled to begin next week, and tension filled the air like the coming winter. Marcus Wilson had made a remarkable recovery. Though he still had pain in his shoulder and walked with a slight limp, he was back at work part-time. His office had a special glass wall now, covered with cards and letters from supporters across the country. His case had become a symbol of the fight against police corruption and prejudice. On a cool Friday morning, Marcus sat in a meeting room at the federal courthouse with the prosecution team. Lead prosecutor Robert Chen spread files across the table. "The evidence against Mercer is overwhelming," Chen said. "We have the dashboard video showing he shot you without justification. We have his text messages showing prejudice against minorities, and we have evidence linking him to the police corruption you were investigating." Marcus nodded. "What about the other officers involved in the corruption?" "4 have already agreed to plead guilty and testify against Mercer," Chen replied. "They're hoping for reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation. They'll confirm that Mercer was the leader of the corruption ring and that he knew who you were when he pulled you over that night." Maria Gonzalez, who had taken over the police corruption case while Marcus was recovering, added, "We found a message Mercer sent just hours before he shot you. He wrote to Officer Thompson, 'That federal prosecutor Wilson is getting too close. Someone needs to stop him before he ruins everything.'" Marcus felt a chill. The message confirmed what they had suspected. His shooting wasn't just about prejudice. It was a deliberate attempt to stop his investigation. "Will I need to testify?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Chen said. "Your testimony will be crucial. The jury needs to hear from you what happened that night." Across town at the county jail, James Mercer sat in a small room with his lawyer. Richard Davis looked tired. The last 3 months had been difficult, for him too. Defending Mercer had made him unpopular in the community. "The prosecution has offered a plea deal," Davis said, sliding a document across the table. "If you plead guilty to attempted murder and testify against the other officers involved in the corruption, they'll recommend a sentence of 15 years instead of seeking the maximum." Mercer stared at the document. 15 years is still a long time. "It's better than 25 to life, which is what you'll get if the jury convicts you," Davis replied. "And they will convict you, James. The evidence is too strong." Mercer's appearance had changed dramatically during his time in jail. His face was thinner, his hair grayer. The confident officer was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood the seriousness of what he had done. "What about my family?" Mercer asked. "Have you heard from Lisa?" Davis shook his head. "I'm sorry. She filed for divorce last week. She's asking for full custody of the children." Mercer closed his eyes, absorbing this final blow. His family was truly gone now. "I need time to think about the plea deal," he said finally. "You have until Monday morning," Davis said, standing up to leave. "After that, the offer expires and we go to trial." The weekend passed slowly. Marcus spent it with his sister Sarah and her family, trying to prepare mentally for the trial ahead. He was nervous about facing Mercer in court, about reliving the night that had almost ended his life. "You don't have to be strong all the time," Sarah told him as they sat on her porch Sunday evening. "It's okay to be scared." Marcus smiled at his sister. "I am scared, but I'm also determined. This case isn't just about me anymore. It's about changing a system that allowed someone like Mercer to abuse his power for so long." Meanwhile, Mercer sat alone in his cell, thinking about the plea deal. 15 years in prison. He would be an old man when he got out. His children would be adults, probably strangers to him. His career, his reputation, his marriage, all destroyed. And for what? For years of prejudice that had poisoned his mind and heart. For the corruption that had seemed so easy to justify at first. Monday morning arrived with a light snowfall, the first of the season. At the federal courthouse, the prosecution team waited to hear if Mercer would accept the plea deal. Marcus sat nervously, tapping his fingers on the table. At 9:30 a.m., Richard Davis entered the room alone. "Mercer has rejected the plea deal," he announced. "He wants to go to trial." Chen frowned. That's a mistake. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Davis nodded. I advised him to take the deal, but he refused. He says he wants to tell his side of the story. As Davis left, Marcus turned to Chen. What does this mean? It means we're going to trial, Chen replied. And it means you'll have to face him in court. The trial began the following day. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters and news crews. Extra security guards checked everyone who entered. The courtroom was packed, with people lining up hours before to get a seat. Judge Patricia Harmon entered and called the court to order. Case number 45792, United States versus James Mercer, the clerk announced. Chen delivered a powerful opening statement describing how Mercer had shot Marcus without justification and how evidence showed it was a deliberate attempt to stop a federal investigation. This is not just about prejudice, Chen told the jury. This is about corruption, abuse of power, and attempted murder. When it was Davis's turn, he tried to paint a different picture. Officer Mercer made a split-second decision in what he perceived as a threatening situation, he argued. He had no intention of killing Mr. Wilson. This was a tragic mistake, not an attempted murder. The first week of the trial focused on technical evidence. Forensic experts explained the bullet trajectories. FBI agents presented the text messages showing Mercer's prejudice and his knowledge of Marcus's investigation. The dashboard camera video was played multiple times, each viewing making Mercer sink lower in his seat. Former officers who had worked with Mercer testified against him, describing how he had led the corruption ring and how he had talked about stopping Marcus's investigation. Officer David Rodriguez, the young rookie, testified about comments Mercer had made about minorities during training rides. He told me not to waste time being nice to people in certain neighborhoods, Rodriguez testified. He said they were all criminals anyway, so we should treat them like criminals. At the end of the week, it was Marcus's turn to testify. He walked slowly to the witness stand, still showing signs of his injuries. The courtroom was completely silent as he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. Chen began the questioning, gently. Mr. Wilson, can you tell the court about your work as a federal prosecutor? Marcus described his career, his dedication to fighting corruption, and the police corruption case he had been working on. Then Chen asked him to describe the night of the shooting. Marcus spoke clearly, describing how he had been pulled over, how he had identified himself as a federal prosecutor, and how Mercer had shot him as he reached for his ID. The jury listened, intently, many of them showing emotion as he described waking up in the hospital, not knowing if he would live or die. Did you make any threatening moves toward Officer Mercer? Chen asked. No, Marcus replied firmly. I told him exactly what I was doing. I moved slowly and carefully. When it was Davis's turn to cross-examine, he tried to suggest that Marcus might have moved suddenly or in a way that could have been perceived as threatening. Is it possible that in the stress of the moment you moved more quickly than you remember? Davis asked. Marcus shook his head. No, I know exactly how I moved. I've been pulled over before. As a black man, I know how to act during a traffic stop to avoid any misunderstandings. This statement hit hard. Many in the courtroom nodded in recognition of this sad reality. As Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, his eyes met Mercer's for the first time since the shooting. Mercer quickly looked away, unable to hold the gaze of the man whose life he had nearly taken. The prosecution rested its case. Now it would be the defense's turn. The biggest question in everyone's mind: would James Mercer take the stand to testify in his own defense? If he did, he would have to face cross-examination by Chen, who would ask him about every prejudiced comment, every corrupt action, and every lie he had told. That night, in his cell, Mercer made the most difficult decision of his life. Prejudiced cop sentenced to maximum sentence for shooting federal prosecutor, Part 5. The second week of the trial began with a surprise announcement from Richard Davis, James Mercer's lawyer. Your Honor, my client wishes to change his plea, Davis said, standing before Judge Harmon. The courtroom erupted in whispers. He wishes to plead guilty to all charges. Judge Harmon called for silence. Mr. Mercer, please rise. Mercer stood slowly, his shoulders hunched. He looked much older than his 52 years. Mr. Mercer, do you understand what your attorney has just stated? Judge Harmon asked. You wish to change your plea to guilty on all charges, including attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and civil rights violations? Yes, Your Honor, Mercer replied, his voice barely audible. Has anyone forced you to make this decision? Or promised you anything in exchange for this plea? No, Your Honor. Do you understand that by pleading guilty you waive your right to a trial and that I will proceed directly to sentencing? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Harmon looked at him carefully. Very well. The court accepts your change of plea. We will schedule a sentencing hearing for next Monday. Until then, you will remain in custody. As Mercer was led away, Marcus Wilson watched him with mixed emotions. He had expected to feel triumph, or at least relief, at Mercer's admission of guilt. Instead, he felt a complex mix of sadness, anger, and something like pity for a man whose life had been destroyed by his own prejudice and corruption. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Marcus and the prosecution team. Mr. Wilson, how do you feel about Mercer's guilty plea? A reporter shouted. Marcus thought carefully before answering. Justice is being served, but there's no joy in this for me. A man's prejudice and corruption led him to try to kill me and nearly succeeded. That's a tragedy for everyone involved, including Officer Mercer himself. Over the next few days, the city buzzed with talk about the upcoming sentencing. Legal experts appeared on local news shows, discussing the likely outcome. Most agreed that given the serious nature of the crimes and the evidence of premeditation, Mercer would likely receive the maximum sentence. On Friday, Marcus received a letter. The return address was the county jail. With shaking hands, he opened it. Dear Mr. Wilson, the letter began in Mercer's handwriting. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to ask for it. I'm writing because I need to tell you the truth before my sentencing on Monday. The letter continued, explaining how Mercer's prejudice had developed over years on the force, how he had begun taking bribes to supplement his income, and how he had gradually built a network of corrupt officers. When I learned you were investigating us, I was angry and afraid, Mercer wrote. I did recognize you that night. I knew exactly who you were when I pulled you over. And when you reached for your ID, I saw an opportunity to stop your investigation. I shot you deliberately, not because I felt threatened, but because I wanted to silence you. Marcus read the letter twice, then called Robert Chen, the lead prosecutor. You need to see this, he said. Mercer has confessed everything in a letter. Chen arrived quickly and read the letter with growing amazement. This is a full confession. He admits the shooting was premeditated. This will certainly impact his sentencing. The weekend passed slowly. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Mercer's letter. The man's honesty, coming so late, was both shocking and somehow admirable. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it showed that perhaps he had finally understood the gravity of his actions. Monday morning arrived with heavy snow. The courthouse was packed for the sentencing hearing. Marcus sat with his sister Sarah and his colleague Maria. His boss, the U.S. attorney, sat behind them in a show of support. Judge Harmon entered the courtroom, her face serious. Before I announce the sentence, does the defendant wish to make a statement? Mercer stood up. Yes, Your Honor. He turned slightly so he could see both the judge and Marcus. I stand before you today as a man who has lost everything. My career, my family, my freedom. But I lost those things because of choices I made. Choices rooted in prejudice and corruption. The courtroom was completely silent as Mercer continued. Shot Marcus Wilson because he was investigating police corruption that I was leading. I recognized him that night and saw an opportunity to stop his investigation. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act. Mercer paused, fighting for control of his emotions. I've had a lot of time to think about how I became the man who could do such a terrible thing. The prejudice didn't happen overnight. It grew slowly, year by year, unchallenged by those around me or by myself. The corruption started small, looking the other way for a bribe, then actively protecting criminals who paid me. Each step made the next one easier. He looked directly at Marcus now. Mr. Wilson, I know words are inadequate, but I am truly sorry for what I did to you. You were doing your job trying to stop corruption and I tried to kill you for it. I deserve whatever sentence the court gives me." Judge Harmon asked, "Does the victim wish to make a statement?" Marcus walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. He still had a slight limp from his injuries. He faced the judge but occasionally glanced at Mercer. "Your Honor, what happened to me that night changed my life forever. I still have physical pain from my injuries. I still have nightmares about being shot. But this case has also strengthened my commitment to fighting corruption and prejudice in our justice system." Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. "Officer Mercer's actions weren't just an attack on me. They were an attack on the entire system of justice. He betrayed his oath as a police officer. He corrupted other officers. And when he was about to be exposed, he tried to kill a federal prosecutor. I believe in justice, not revenge," Marcus concluded. "I ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of these crimes and sends a message that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it." Judge Harmon nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." She turned to face Mercer. "James Mercer, please rise for sentencing." Mercer stood, his lawyer beside him. "Mr. Mercer, the crimes you have committed are among the most serious this court has seen. You abused your position of trust as a police officer. You engaged in corruption, and you attempted to murder a federal prosecutor to prevent your crimes from being exposed." Judge Harmon's voice was firm but not angry. "Your prejudice and corruption didn't just harm Mr. Wilson. They harmed your fellow officers, the justice system, and the entire community that trusted you to protect them." She paused, looking at the papers before her. "Taking into account your confession and your expression of remorse, I nevertheless find that the gravity of your crimes requires the maximum sentence allowed by law." The courtroom held its collective breath. "I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The gavel struck with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent room. Mercer showed no reaction beyond a slight slump of his shoulders. He had expected this outcome. As Mercer was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met Marcus's one last time. There was a moment of understanding between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but an acknowledgement of the truth they now shared. Outside the courthouse, snow fell gently on the city. Reporters surrounded Marcus as he left the building with his sister and colleagues. "Are you satisfied with the sentence, Mr. Wilson?" a reporter asked. "Justice has been served," Marcus replied. "But this is just one case. The work of addressing prejudice and corruption in our justice system continues." As cameras flashed around him, Marcus looked up at the falling snow. His near death had changed him, had made him even more determined to fight for justice. And, in a strange way, James Mercer's fall from respected officer to convicted criminal had put a human face on the prejudice and corruption he had been fighting. 6 months later, Marcus stood before a group of new police cadets at the Riverside Police Academy. He had been invited to speak about ethics and integrity in policing. His story had become a powerful example of why prejudice and corruption could not be tolerated. "The oath you will take is sacred," he told the young men and women before him. "You will have power over people's lives and freedom. How you use that power will define not just your career but your character." Among the cadets was David Rodriguez, the rookie who had testified against Mercer. After the trial, he had considered leaving the force but instead had decided to stay and help change the culture from within. "The easy path is to look the other way when you see prejudice or corruption," Marcus continued. "Officer Mercer's story shows where that path leads. I challenge you to take the harder path, to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." As Marcus finished his speech, the cadets rose in a standing ovation. The Mercer case had changed Riverside. It had exposed corruption, confronted prejudice, and begun the difficult process of rebuilding trust between police and community. And, for Marcus Wilson, it had reinforced his belief that justice, though sometimes slow and imperfect, was still possible, even in the most challenging circumstances.